Hey everyone, welcome back. Expanding the zone. It's hard to believe here we are on show number 9, and this week's show is going to take a look at parent perspective and looking at that viewpoint that the parents have, and obviously looking at the relationship between coaches and parents, and understanding that if you're going to be a leader of kids at any age, you're going to have that relationship, and it's going to have to have some back and forth and some good dynamic there in order for you to be successful. Before I get to that a little bit more, in case you're joining us for the first time, I'm Shayne Combs, joined by my brother Matt, as I always am here on Expanding the Zone. And Matt, I'll tell you what, I look at it as just incredible feedback this past week. It was our Little League show number 8, and we get great feedback pretty much on every show to this point, but this past week's been even a little bit more special. And I guess that's where I wanted to start. It started the very next day after we released the show, and I was just kind of going down through my notes here. I think there's been principals, there's been teachers, there's been coaches. I think I counted 4 different sports, different levels: junior high coaches, JV coaches, varsity coaches. Had one business leader, and it wasn't just a day or two after the show. This even back today, I was on the phone for 20 minutes. With an administrator from down in Southern Ohio. This is a guy that's worn the hat of Little League coach, a varsity coach. He's been a parent, current administrator, as I said, so has a lot of different leadership. He's had his own business on the side, so he's had a lot of different hats in leadership. So as we share different things, I kind of wanted to touch on some of those, if you don't mind, real quick before I throw it to you. Most people agree that the fundamentals are some of the things lacking in Little League, and in no way ready to point the finger at any one person. It's a little bit more of the structure is what the feedback's saying. They agreed with what you were saying last week about the ratio of games and practice. They think there's a lot of pressure on these Little League coaches in terms of you have to get little kids ready to play games, and there has to be a little bit of organization and such to do that, which really takes away from some of those things. So as I come to you, we don't want to spend too much time on last week, because again, people can go back and check us out on YouTube there, SVC Sports Zone Shayne, or wherever you get your podcasts. We're on iHeartRadio, Spotify, Apple, just about anywhere. We're out there. So Matt, as I welcome you to the show, just a chance to reflect on last week's Little League show, and it kind of just as a natural segue into tonight's topic, which I'll talk about a little bit more, but maybe just talk just a little bit about show 8 and some of the feedback we received.
Yeah, Shayne, I mean, it was great to get feedback. It always is, with the type of show we do here. I mean, it's not, to be honest, as much fun if we don't get a little bit of feedback from the people who listen. And plus, it helps us with future shows. As you mentioned, a lot of what we heard tonight or heard last week gives us the subject for tonight's show, because when we were talking about youth sports, some of what came up was the parents' role in youth sports, obviously. And so we got an email. I know you're going to talk a little about it, but I think one of the emails we got sort of sparked something for tonight's show and said, hey, maybe we should do something with the parents, with the whole subject of parent-coach relationships and that type of thing.
Well, it did, and there probably about 3 different things led us down this path for show 9 here tonight on parent perspective. Some people talked about, fair or unfair, the ego of parents in terms of, that, win at all cost or got to have this real competitive environment. Other people talked about it in a far more situation in terms of relationship, talked about how parents and coaches of all ages have to have a common goal and work together, and there's obstacles there. There's financial things, there's facility things, there's just resource things. So again, the adults involved have to work together. So there's about 2 or 3 different things throughout all the different feedback. Some came actually from parents, some came, like I said, from administrators and so forth. So it just made sense. And I guess on that note, Matt, where I wanted to start with it is, I guess you have to understand subjective point of view. I think, to be fair in any of this, I think in leadership, when you have to be able to put yourself in other people's shoes to truly understand where they're coming from. And with us loving sports so much, what better way to maybe look at that than think of our favorite team? I know a lot of times in my media role, I'll go and just watch a great game, and I know I find myself watching it with a really open mind. I'm very objective, right? I can truly feel like, okay, that was a foul, that wasn't, charge block, I didn't like that particular thing or this. But then all of a sudden, if I'm watching a game where my favorite team is involved, or I have a rooting interest, all of a sudden I know that I get just a little bit more intense even as an observer. Every time there's a bang bang play at first, it's a safer out. If I'm watching the Reds game, right, it's I hang on every call. Or if I'm again a fan at a basketball game, let's say I'm watching your team and I want to see you do really well, I'll hang on different calls in a different way. So don't you feel like there's two things I want you to start with here. One, don't you feel like subjective point of view is naturally going to put us in a biased situation to where we have to understand the perspective of who we're leading, and at the same time, people have to then understand the perspective of the people doing the leading, or that the people who are trying to put things into place. And until that relationship takes place, you're always going to be kind of contradicting one another, aren't you?
Yeah, it goes back to that word. It seems like we use a lot on this show, which is perspective. Just
I think it's important in leadership.
well, yeah, well, there's no question, and when it comes to the parent perspective or the coach parent relationship, you have to understand both sides. And I've always said this. The a parent automatically has their favorite player on the team, right? I mean, we know that.
Sure.
I mean,
Yeah.
I mean, as a parent, your son or daughter is your favorite player on the team, and it should be that way. I get
Right.
it. You know what I mean?
Right.
And as a coach, the coach has a different lens that he or she looks through, which is more of the entire group. There's not really a coach isn't focused on one player or two players. And you'll hear people say, well, coaches don't have favorites. Well, coaches have favorites
Right.
sometimes. I mean,
Right.
coaches, there's kids I look back on who were my favorite kids to be around because their personalities were just great. We meshed. I enjoyed them. And the funny thing about that is a lot of those players were the ones who never got to play hardly. So it wasn't like you'll hear some people say, "Well, coaches play favorites." I don't know that they play favorites. Do they have favorites? Yeah, but some of my favorites have been kids that sit at the end of the bench and never got to play. I think we play the people we think can help us win, especially at the varsity level. Does that mean we don't have favorite kids? No, I mean, we're all human. I think we all, if you think about our relationships, whether it's the workplace or wherever, you're going to naturally gravitate towards some people more than others because it fits your personality or whatever. So, but my point is this: coaches we are looking at an entire group, an entire team as our first priority. It's the group. Whereas a parent, naturally, their first priority is their son or daughter, and it should be that way. That should be their first priority. I mean, that's their most awesome responsibility in this world, is raising that kid, right? So but I think it's important for us to understand in leadership, as a baseline, the start of anything, that dynamic right there, where a coach and a parent are looking at things through entirely different lenses.
Well, I think that's well said, and I guess the one thing I would say that fits the Little League show last week perfectly, and then transitions tonight even better, is I hope people understand on expanding the zone that I feel like I speak for you too, Matt, when I say this. I'm not necessarily trying to be right. I'm trying to
Right.
get it right. You
Right.
know what I mean? It's one of those things in terms of uh, I love this new show. It's about a year old now, called Songland. And if you're not familiar with it, these songwriters come in and they present the established artists their songs. There's like four of them, and then some of the best songwriters in the world then pick three of them, and they get to go in the studio with them and then basically the artist picks one to release as a big time song. And they talk a lot about how it's a teamwork thing. It's not changing this, changing that. It's truly a collaboration where they are working together to get a final product. And I guess that's why I say, I'm not trying to be right, I'm trying to get it right. Is, I've always felt like whenever we get something, if it takes us 10 times to get it right, I think at some point we have to give the 9 previous, failures a little bit of credit in terms of what we learned from and what we changed. So I want people to keep that in mind as we go through some of this stuff tonight. Matt, one thing I would like, and I think this is where you and I really give neat perspective tonight, is you are a parent yourself. I am not. And so the first thing I would ask you is, I've witnessed people throughout my entire career, my friends, as they go through different life stages, and I'm sure I've changed too. They get married, they change a little bit. They become a parent, they change a little bit. They get a certain job, they change a little bit. What would you say in terms of how becoming a parent has changed you, and how that's maybe given you different perspective when it comes to this coach-parent relationship in your everyday job?
I have a unique perspective on this from this standpoint. I was a head coach for about 8 years or so before I became a parent. Okay. So, an assistant coach before that, a few years. So I had kind of this big bulk of experience as a non-parent. And then, the last 12 years or so, I've been a parent. So it's funny, because I'll be honest with you, as a coach, I know that I looked at parents differently before I became one. I looked at parents as, man, these guys, they're crazy. They think this, they think this. And then you become a parent and you think, okay, I understand a little bit more where they were coming from, because I think there's this natural instinct that takes over as a parent where your instinct is to protect. Your instinct is to do whatever you can possibly do to help your son or daughter be successful. I think, we've seen it. We've seen people change, like you said. I could give many examples where, I've known people, whether it be friends of mine or just, people that I knew, we'd have conversations prior to them becoming parents about coaching or about leadership, about whatever, the way playing time happens, or a coach utilizes players or whatever, and they would see it one way, and then all of a sudden when they become a parent, and especially if it involves their son or daughter, right, it becomes a whole different ball game. And you think, I've seen situations where it almost seems like a spaceship came in, abducted
Right.
this person, took them away, and sent somebody else in their stead. I almost thought it happened to you when you were talking about watching Songland. I know there's not a lot of sports on TV right now.
Well, I got to make
come
I
on.
got to make do. You can only watch the 1982 All-Star game so many times.
Yeah, you can only watch the classics so
Yeah.
many times before you have to resort to some reality television. But no, again, but I do. There's no doubt in my mind. There's no doubt in my mind that I changed when I became a parent.
Right.
I've seen it with other people. I think the trick is, though, in all honesty, is you have to be able to filter that out. You have to be able, as a parent, to take a step back. Okay. It's like I watch my kids in little league sports or whatever, and all of a sudden you look out there and you think, why is my son not batting 3 spots higher in the batting order? Or why so and so taking all the shots and my kid not getting a shot? But then you catch yourself and say, I don't want to be one of those people that goes and complains about that. This is youth sports, and probably, in all honesty, my experience is like as a varsity coach has helped me in that area, be able to step back, because I've sat here, for so long, I've observed parents. And so it's given me a feel for how I want to try to be and how I don't want to be as a parent. But there's no question that, to say it doesn't flip a switch inside of you and change you a little bit would be a lie. I think every parent would tell you it does. And it's how you handle that, I guess, is to, to what level of relationship you're going to be able to have with your son or daughter's coaches and all that.
You bring up a great point with relationships, because the whole time you're talking, I was thinking this is such a good point to start with. We have to understand perspective. We have to respect that passion, that love that a parent is going to have.
Right.
But when you said relationships, Matt, I'll be honest with you. One of the things that had come to my mind when you coach in a smaller community and you've been there 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, it gets to a situation where you're naturally going to have friendships with people. And the dynamic of when you start to coach, what later on we might talk about parents coaching their own kid, but I want to talk right now about you coaching your friends' kids, and how what I have found is in leadership, sometimes you have to make tough decisions. Sometimes you have to just make calls that, on playing time, on roster spots, on awards, on different things. And I know in my 20 years, unfortunately, I've lost some really, really good friends. Really, and when I say lost, I just friendships weakened, I guess is what I'm saying, because of
Right.
bad feelings that had come from nothing more than just the coaching process. If a kid, a kid coming through and maybe not, moving up to varsity quick enough, or maybe not getting to play the right position, or maybe not getting to play, like you said, enough, or then as they go up, maybe not winning certain awards or getting honored, or if it's an elite player, maybe you didn't help get them recruited enough, and whatever it is, each step of the way, all the way up. And that's a tough dynamic. I know you've always tried to teach me a lot about boundaries, but I guess what I would say in return to you is, in a small community, boundaries are very difficult to establish sometimes. I mean, it may be a situation where you're teaching next door to mom or dad. It may be a situation where you've already been friends with a family for more than a decade, and then all of a sudden you're coaching their kid.
Right.
Do you understand where I'm coming from here? These relationships that sometimes you know what you sign up for, but it's really unfortunate sometimes that that it can kind of get to that point.
The boundaries, I mean, the boundaries are important, obviously, between coaching and parenting, or the coach and parent relationship. But they don't always solve every issue, because the boundaries you're talking about, I'm assuming, are the ones like, I try to have as a coach, for instance, and I think these go both ways. Okay, like for me as a coach, there's certain things that we talk about when we have our preseason parent meetings, which I know we're going to talk a little bit about later, but
Right.
things like, look, I'm not going to discuss playing time. I'm not going to discuss strategy. Parents and coaches are never going to agree 100% on playing time. And if a coach tries to talk strategy with every single parent that asks, that, it's going to become a distraction, time consuming, and all that. So those are the kind of the things from my end are that are kind of off limits. But I also think coaches need to respect parenting decisions. Like I've never been a big believer in like curfews and how a kid cuts his hair. Things like that, because quite honestly, I feel like at that point I'm crossing lines into the parent's personal life, right? I mean, a parent should have their own personal relationship with their kid, and if that parent's okay with the way the kid's wearing his hair, okay. And if that, we
Right.
always tell our guys, if you care about the team, hopefully you're going to come in and get to bed at a decent hour and do things right. But you know what? I'm not calling your house and checking on you, because one, you need to have some level of maturity to do it yourself. And two, your parents are your parents. That's their job to parent you. So I guess those boundaries goes both ways. But what you're talking about is an interesting dynamic, because boundaries really don't have anything to do with a coach and another adult being friends, all right, and developing a friendship. Then all of a sudden you're coaching their son or daughter, and again, their perspective changes, right?
Right.
Your perspective is going to be different than theirs. We talked about that. And here's the kicker to all of it. Both sides take things very personally. And the old saying, don't take it personal. Well, think about this for a minute. There's nothing more personal to a parent than their kid. I mean, that's the most important thing in your life. That's personal. And if you're, as a coach, the coaches that do it right, Think about, Shane, the time and effort and energy and hours you put in, right, to coaching. How can you not take that personal, right? If somebody says to me, oh, don't take it personal, I'm saying, hey, wait a minute here, man. I've busted my backside for 20 years trying to build a program, or I've been here, I've been doing this, and you're telling me not to take it personal? You bet I'm going to take it personal. So a parent's going to take it personal, a coach is going to take it personal, and that's where, let's face it, some of those relationships get damaged, like, or I think you used the word weakened, right?
Right, right. No, there's no doubt about it. And I think as you continue to go back and forth with the perspective, I think another thing that comes to my mind, I guess this ties into Little League a little bit, is the time, the money, and therefore some of the frustration that's going to come with the investment that these parents have made. I guess what I would say is, in years past, Matt, I don't know that a parent was asked to make as much of an investment to what, say, the seventh grade, in terms of a
Right.
lot of travel, a lot of money.
That's way younger now.
Way younger now. Just, first of all, the way little leagues are done, a little bit more driving to and from, driving to different venues, probably charging admission. Things are done. There's probably more, payments due because, where officials and umpires and different things used to be more of a volunteer thing. Now it's done more in a higher, regular, license on people and kind of have more of the serious contests. So I think that's part of the perspective too, don't you think, in terms of, I think these relationships used to start off on a lot more solid foundation in terms of kids would come up through, um, they would know the coach a little bit more. They would know, the varsity program a little bit more, the kids and so forth, having a rapport with one another, where now it seems like there's a little bit more of a disconnect, which I think hurts this perspective. And don't you think it's important for varsity coaches to understand that in this new day and age, that you have to respect the fact that how much money parents have put into this, how much time. In many cases, many of these parents have done the coaching. You know
Right.
how coaching is. If you coach kids for 3, 4, 5 years, you're going to be connected to them, right? You're going to have
Right.
you're going to have a passion for them, which you should. So there's a lot of things there. What I found is, when Little League changed, I started to see a whole new perspective of parent and coach relationships. And that's why I wanted to start with that perspective piece. But before we go, so I want to shift gears a little bit, if we can, Matt, once we've established that part of it, and start to get into to this factor. The human nature is, to me, that everybody's always going to want a little bit more. I think back to, when I was in college, I would drive a certain car, and then, if I got my first job, I might drive a nicer car. I mean, it's one of those things where each time you maybe take a step in your career or do different things, I assume that different people, like to do different things. And I think the same applies in sports. I think what happens is you see your kid get to a certain level, don't you feel like that there's something there that, I don't know the right way to say this. There's something there that you're going to want to see them take the next step. And I guess the reason I bring that up is, when you are going through different things with your kids, when you feel like they're ready to advance, don't you feel like there's something there that once you want to be able to give them that opportunity to do so. But in doing so, sometimes it can be very difficult in terms of maybe them finding their place with their particular group that they're working with, being in the academic setting, the athletic setting. You kind of see where I'm going with this, in terms of balancing that personal goal with, the overall dynamic, in terms of, again, small school settings, in terms of their classmates and their teammates that they're growing up with.
I do understand, I think, what you're trying to say, and I think it goes back to the point you were making a minute ago, a little bit with coaches and parents, particularly, that just being the two major parties in this. Okay, the coaches and the parents understanding each other's commitment I think it helps that a little bit. I guess let me try to explain what I'm saying. If, like we mentioned with parents, the commitment they put in, especially at a younger age. Now, you talked about it, right? The travel. I mean, I talked to a parent one time that said, in June and July, we were in 6 different cities on different weekends and staying
Right.
at hotels, eating out. And we spent thousands of dollars. So this financial commitment at an early age with travel, sports, and whatnot, not only it's a financial thing, but it's also a time thing. And when, like you're saying, when you see your kid have success and you've invested all this time and money in it, you expect that then, I think, to translate to your particular school and the success within that school and your son or daughter's individual success along with that. And I think what happens is if you see it as a parent, you see, wait a minute, we're not going anywhere here. I've put all this effort in, my son or daughter's gotten better, and now I want to see it pay off. I want to see them win a championship. I want to see them be all league or whatever those things are. And if all of a sudden you look and think, I don't know if that's going to happen, that's what leads to some of these things I think we're going to talk about, or we have talked about in the past, even with transfers, but I'm sure they'll come up tonight a little bit. But then I think the other side of that is parents, or as parents have to understand the commitment the coaches make too and what they're trying to accomplish. And I think for that to happen, there has to be that relationship. There has to be a little bit of there has to be a relationship between coaches and parents so both sides can sort of understand the other side's, what they're trying to accomplish. And it ultimately comes down a little bit to like, what does each side owe each other, right? I mean, what
Right.
does the coach owe a parent? What does the parent owe a coach? And I think ultimately what you owe each other is respecting the other's point of view and perspective, and then trying to work together for what's best for the kid. And I think that's what both sides have to try to do. And I think when that relationship is fractured, when the parents feel like the coach isn't really making an effort to better the program or to do the things necessary for the team and their kid to have success, that's when that relationship's fractured. When the coach, on the other hand, thinks, well, this parent's not trying at all to work within the framework of what we're doing here as a team or as a school, that hurts the relationship. So that's where the coach and the parent have to figure out a way to work together.
Well, and again, that's when I'm saying shift gears. I'm saying it's a two-way street. I think we've
Right.
been more than fair to this point in the show, and talking about understanding perspective and coaches being very understanding of the where the parents coming from. But I guess looking at it the other way, I think it's more than fair that coaches expect that same effort in return, because I think what happens sometimes, Matt, I don't know what word's fair to use, ego, whatever. I think parents, particularly of some of the younger talented kids, they go out and again, you just said it, they spend the money, they travel, they do all these different things, but they don't totally respect the fact that a high school coach, or even a junior high coach for that matter, has to kind of take on 10, 11, 12 personalities, 10, 11, 12 families in terms of their commitment and so forth. And they may not all match. So I think it's important for parents to understand that if you really want to be a part of something elite for your particular kid, it's so important to invest in the school, invest in their classmates, and invest in program, invest in camps. You know what I'm saying? It bothers me as a coach, and again, I feel like I can say this now because I think we've been more than fair on the other side of it. It bothers me as a coach when I hear parents say, my fifth grader is a little bit too advanced for that camp, or for that workout, or for this fundamental work, or those types of things. That doesn't seem like much at the younger levels, but I'm telling you, it starts to fracture classes. It starts to fracture programs in terms of, as they come up into their seventh grade team, their eighth grade team, their ninth grade team, in terms of the numbers. At the small school setting, I see it all the time. I see accelerated kids coming up through. I see it in academics too. They work ahead, they kind of go their own route, whatever it may be. And then when it comes time to put it all together, there's a fracture there in chemistry. I see it with the adults. I see it with parent groups. I see it
Right.
with the players. I see it with, between the parents and the administration. And those are the things. Now, I don't know what word's fair to use, Matt. Is it an ego thing? Is it, an expectation thing? You mentioned, some people just get fed up with it and leave, and that leads to transfer things.
Right.
I don't know. I don't know. Is it fair, unfair to call it an ego-driven thing in terms of, it almost reached a point of no return to where the parent and the coach really have trouble getting on the same page.
Yeah, it's an interesting dynamic for sure. Because we've seen you use the word, like you brought up transfers. I mean, we've seen so many of these, right, and for different reasons and all kinds of things. And some of them, are those just ego-driven decisions by parents who, at times I even wonder, does their kid want to transfer, or is it more because the parent wants it to happen or whatever? But then you do see the other side of that sometimes where a transfer is legitimate. It's maybe the school didn't do enough to create an environment where that particular athlete felt comfortable, so they had, because ultimately what do parents do? They're trying to do what's best for their kid, right? And if they feel like, man, he or she's in a bad situation here, over here we can make it better for them, hey, I think sometimes that's legitimate. But ultimately what it comes down to is this: for me, it's like when you're in leadership, the whole idea of leadership is to take somebody else with you, right? It's to not only better yourself, but it's also to better those around you, right? So that you can be a part of a team and part of something bigger than yourself. And what you brought up about the idea of, well, I've got to take my kid somewhere else because this just isn't challenging enough or whatever. Well, you're not really being a leader as a parent there, and you're not making the situation better, because all you're doing is helping your son or daughter, but you're not taking others with you. Like the best teams I've had at Vinton County, for instance, in basketball, are the ones where a parent was really active in their child's development, but what they also did was they took a couple other players with them, and said, hey, we're gonna all do this.
Right.
We're gonna, not only is my son going to go to this camp, I'm going to take you two with me, and we're all going to go to it. And that's building up that camaraderie, and it's helping develop more than just one player. And then on the flip side of that, obviously that's what coaches are trying to do, right? I mean, great leaders, they attract, right? I mean, if you're a dynamic leader, you sort of attract people to you. I mean, if you think about it, Shayne, the people who you consider great leaders, I mean, I'm talking people here, okay? People that you hang out with. If I said to you, hey, who are the great leaders that you see on a weekly basis or daily basis? They're probably people that you look forward to seeing. You see what I'm saying? They sort of attract you. You gravitate toward them a little bit. So I guess that's what I'm trying to say here. It's the coaches. I think the coach's job is to attract, to build the type of program that's dynamic enough where people want to be a part of it. But I think that the parents in youth sports, especially as they're helping develop their own child, has to think about, okay, what can I do to better the situation when my kid gets into 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th grade? Don't just sit back and say, well, this program's terrible, I'm going to take my kid and go somewhere else. Wait a minute, what have you been doing to help the last few years? I think that's what you're trying to say a little bit.
Well,
Because in a lot of these situations, let's be honest, in a lot of these situations, some of these parents are also coaches in youth sports. They're coaching their son's little league baseball team or their Pee Wee basketball team. So what are you doing in that situation as a youth coach to develop more than just your child's skills?
Well, there's no question, because again, the reason I spent the first half hour on tonight's show talking about perspectives, it's something I've tried to be very, very respectful of. And as a leader, I want to put other people in position and empower them to do their jobs, right? You want to put good junior high coaches in place. You want to put good staff in place at the high school level in all sports. And as these elite players start to come up through the ranks, you want to form a relationship with them. You want to form with their families, and you want to have them be ambassadors for the program as well. I think, like you just said, I think what happens is when these people approach things with a very positive attitude, people start to fall in place. I start to see the disconnect in terms of when different people have different goals, and it's almost like they try to sabotage the other parts of little league program or the direction of where they want to go. So those are the things that have to get fixed. It has to be a two-way street. As I've said all night tonight, coaches have to do a better job of understanding the perspective of parents, and how parents are probably, unless it's a situation where they, played at that school or have a long, tenure or whatever, most of the time you're probably dealing with people that are going to be invested in about a 6, 7, 8 year window, and you have to, you got to sell your product to them. But at the same time, as you said, parents have to be very respectful to the challenges that the coaches have. And I think that they have to step out in front, especially in sports that they are good at, in sports that they care about, and be an ambassador of sorts, and really give those particular programs a chance. So I think the balance back and forth, Matt, has been really well said. Now let's go to this route for a second. From a parent standpoint, it always concerns me a little bit when sports takes on a whole life of its own, and this is real eye-opening to me as a middle school teacher, because a lot of times what happens, Matt, like say parent-teacher conference, right? I'll get parents sometimes that they're not as concerned with what's going on in a math, language arts type of class compared to what they are, in terms of a little league sports program or junior high. That's a different dynamic too. As a parent, as you start to get kids getting to an age where academics start to become really serious, what are some of your emotions there? What's some of your experience in terms of dealing with that particular dynamic, but from the classroom to the athletic quarter field, as these kids become just not students, but now student athletes?
Well, I think it goes back a little bit to what we talked about in another show, where it's sort of like when what you do is in the public eye, right, and people can see it, then it becomes more important, because it's like you got to keep up with the Joneses, so to speak. Like you want to
Right.
make sure that, and I think that, let's just be honest, I think most people would say that academics is more important than athletics for like say a high school student, but we don't always live that. It's one thing to say it, but you don't always live that out. And the reason we don't live it out is if my son fails a biology test, I know, and he knows, and a teacher knows. If your son goes out and shoots 5 air balls and your team loses by 20 points on a Friday night, everybody's sitting there watched it, right? So I think sports become really personal because of the public perception, right? I mean, they're so public. They're out there for everybody to view, right? I mean, and I think sometimes, so I guess when you say, well, somebody showed a little more interest in athletics, don't you think that's kind of the reason why? It's because it's so visible, everybody can see it.
I think it is, but I'll say this, even I'm a little bit surprised with parents. And again, I'm not a parent, so again, I'm learning all the time. That's what I love about leadership. I'm constantly learning because I'm trying to understand perspective. I look sometimes as middle school as a great learning opportunity. I look at it as, okay, your kid didn't work at this particular level, and he or she didn't turn out assignment and didn't do this, and a lot of it's like your scoreboard talk, right? A lot of it is that they're not going to make the honor roll.
Right,
All of a
right.
sudden it's going to be in the newspaper. We're going to have a award ceremony. They're not going to get a certificate or whatever. Where I look at it more as, why not teach kids this at this age, to where when it starts to matter more, it'll go. So sometimes I have that struggle in terms of understanding. I almost have to approach it as, man, if I were a parent, I'd feel like I'd want to be able to teach this particular lesson now. But again, that's where I'm constantly learning, and I'm constantly meeting a lot of different types of people. So, Matt, I think we've really covered this back and forth. Let's, in a final thought here, see if we can't organize our thoughts to really put a better solution in play. as I kind of lay this out, tell me what you agree with, disagree with, maybe fill in the blanks for me. On one side, a coach's responsibility is to respect the fact that a parent's prized possession would be their children. That they're going to invest in them. They're going to, provide every opportunity for them. They're going to want opportunities for them. And coaches have to be very, very respectful of that. On the other side, parents have to respect the job and the time and the effort that coaches put into what they do, in terms of not just at their particular level, but really throughout the entire program. Varsity coach obviously trying to balance an entire coaching staff, trying to still have a role in Little League, although be it very difficult to do, as we talked about last week, compared to what it might have been 10, 15, 20 years ago. Trying to run camps, trying to run fundraisers, trying to do all those different things. And so I think the parents have to understand that there's a requirement there and an involvement there as well. And if those two sides can come together, then you can have a pretty good success. But if there is a disconnect in those particular areas, especially at the small school, it can really lead to some issues that are very difficult to overcome in terms of trying to accomplish a common goal. Is that a fair way to sum up tonight's show? What maybe am I missing? What fill in some blanks for me there in terms of maybe summing up what we want the message to be in short, in terms of everything we've covered tonight.
Well, no, I don't think you missed anything, but I'll take it one step further. I think that everything you're saying there is true, but I think the solution, like we always talk about on this show, right? Try to be part of the solution. I keep coming back to this one word in my mind, which is communication. The communication between parent and between coaches. It has to be open. It has to be honest. And one of the most important, it has to be appropriate. And what I mean by that is not what is said. I'm talking more of how the communication happens, a time, the place, how that happens, how that works out, because that communication can go a long way to strengthening that relationship. Because, for instance, I'm a big believer in preseason parent meetings. Okay,
Right.
Now I'm not talking about these generic things that the OHSA has us do, where we watch a video and and all that. I'm talking the real thing where you have meaningful conversation with parents before the season starts. What I've always tried to, and there's some years I get a little lazy on this, and I shouldn't, but I always try to meet individually with parents before the season starts, like of my varsity players. And you're going to have those situations where you've coached a kid for 3 years, and I know his parents really well. I'm not going to meet with them this year. They pretty much know by now my expectations. But especially the newcomers, right? Maybe you have a sophomore coming on the varsity, or even a junior or senior in their first year varsity, meeting with their parents. I found that it's almost like a preemptive type of communication where, hey, this is where I see your son's role for this team being, and this is what I see the playing time, and this is what, and in those situations, especially where the parent may not agree, at least there's not that shock factor of showing up to game one and their son playing 2 minutes or not playing at all. They don't agree with you probably, but at least you've been honest and you've been upfront, and you say, okay, here's where we're at.
Call me an idiot, but don't call me a liar type of
thing. Right, exactly right. You're exactly right. I mean, you put it out there, and we're gonna have to agree to disagree. I get it, but at least I'm being upfront. I think coaches owe that to parents. Okay, in the preseason, what I think parents have to do in return, though, is those boundaries we talked about earlier, okay? The playing time, the strategy, things like that. But more importantly, whenever there is a need to talk to a coach, it has to be done then in the right way for both the parents' benefit and the coach's benefit. It's behind closed doors. It's in private. It's, hey, I'm not going to talk about you in public. I appreciate it if you don't talk about me in public, that type of thing, right? Because a lot of times the timing and how that's done
Right.
I'll share a quick story, and I don't want
Oh,
to
go
take
ahead.
forever here. I know this is a long answer, but I had a situation many years ago now where we were in a stretch where we had lost a few games in a row and things were going a little bit rough, and my assistant coach and I were on the bus talking about a particular kid, and we were saying, we'll just call this kid Johnny, okay? We were talking about Johnny, saying, gosh, we're not getting much production out of this particular position on our team, and Johnny hasn't really got the opportunity yet. Look, the kid lacks some athletic ability and some of those things we want him to have, but he's smart. He does things right at practice. He works hard. Are we to the point where we just have to shake it up and give this kid a chance a little bit and see what he can do? Because obviously this other guy's not producing the way we thought he'd produce. The whole story, right? You can imagine this scenario happening. I think it was like a Saturday night game. We had talked, hey, if things don't get better tonight, we need to give Johnny a look next week. We'll start running him with the first team in practice a little bit, getting him some reps, whatever. We go to this game. We play a tight game. We get beaten a close one, and I'll never forget it. Johnny's dad came up to me after the game on the court. All right. Now, this particular guy is a nice guy. He didn't come up yelling and screaming. He wasn't throwing a fit. He wasn't cussing. This guy's a good dude. He wouldn't do that, right? But he wanted to find out, why is my son not getting an opportunity? He came up, very respectful, started asking me questions on the court. The problem with it is this. As I'm talking to him, all right, there's 10 other parents standing in the distance staring at us. Right, looking at us. They know what this guy's come to me about, right? He's come to me about his son getting a chance to play. Well, little did he know, and probably still to this day doesn't, is he put me as a coach in an impossible situation and really ruined the chance for his kid to get that opportunity. Because think about it, had I at that point, even though I had planned on giving this kid a look anyway, can you imagine if I would have given that kid a look in the next game? What's every single parent standing behind that guy think? Hey, Johnny's dad went to the coach. Next thing you know, Johnny's getting to play a little bit. So they wouldn't have known that I was already planning on looking at him. So I had to pull the plug on that idea and go in a different direction, because if I would have lost the respect of my team, I would have lost my locker room. Does that make sense?
That makes total sense. Yeah.
And it was all because of the timing. It wasn't, like I said, this guy didn't make a fool of himself. He didn't yell and scream and cuss. And he was very respectful, but it was the timing. Had we had that same conversation on the phone the next day, or we had that same conversation in my coach's office, I'd have been fine. It wouldn't have mattered. But the fact that you approach a coach on the floor after a game and you do it publicly like that, as a parent, you have to be very careful with that. A coach owes a parent the respect and the courtesy of open communication. And I think the parent, in turn, owes the coach the respect and courtesy of, hey, look, if I need to talk to you, we're going to do it privately. I'm not going to catch you in the heat of the moment. We're going to do it the right way. Okay. And I know that was kind of a long answer, but I guess what you were saying to me comes back to that talk and that trust, that communication that builds that trust.
Well, the word that comes to my mind, in the Leader in Me program that I've been studying is proactive. You try to put things in place out in front, and you're right. And I hope I don't come across last week and this week as picking on younger parents. I guess the reason I return to that point so much, Matt, is in my 20-year career, look, we've all had upset parents. We've all had different concerns. But for the most part, my communication with my parents in grades 8 through 12 has been outstanding. Now, maybe I have the benefit of being a junior high teacher as well. So I have every single student in our school, unless they move in after the 8th grade, I have every one of them. So that obviously helps. But my point is, I see too much disconnect in today's time between parents and coaches, clear back down into the 5th, 6th, 7th grade, where there hasn't even been a chance for that relationship to form yet. And I guess that's where I came back to that, and that's why I
Well,
love.
and I
Yeah,
don't want to interrupt you, but I think you're right, because think about it. By the time parents are like coaches, right? The longer they do it, the better they get at it. So it's like by the time you get your parents, by the time you have a parent of a junior or senior in high school, that parent has been at it for a while as a sports parent, right? They've
right.
learned the ups and the downs, and they're sort of seasoned veterans, right? As being a parent,
Well, and they've
where
kind of started to pick and choose. The ones that are still there come their sophomore, junior, senior year. Obviously, like it a little bit. They're probably pretty good at it.
right.
Whatever. Yeah.
I mean, when you're dealing with youth parents and youth sports, those parents are going through it for the first time. Because I
Right.
can tell you, as a parent, I have an 8-year-old that plays, little league baseball and basketball. My older son did a little bit of it, but like I'm still sort of going through it for the first time. I mean, I'm still like brand new. I've been coaching 20 plus years, right? But I'm brand new as a sports parent, as a youth parent.
Mm.
So I see that perspective, and it's like we're all going through it at that age for the first time. And don't you feel like that's where it gets tough, because nobody has a clue yet on how to handle it because they haven't been through it yet. And so what I'm talking about with like these parent meetings, it's
Right.
almost more important that you do them at the younger levels. I mean, if
Right.
you like say you're going to coach 4th grade basketball, have a parent meeting, right? I mean, have a meeting with the parents saying, here are my goals as a coach. You
Hmm.
know, here's our, like we talked about in our youth sports last week. Here's my priorities, right? We want them to have fun. We want to teach skills. We want to do this. And, if your priorities are different than that, like if I were coaching a 4th grade basketball team, winning would be way down that list, right? And there's
Right.
probably going to be a parent there saying, wait a minute, winning's my number one priority. Okay. Well, we know from the start, you and I have a little bit of a disconnect. We're going to have to meet in the middle somewhere, right? So
Right.
I think those meetings, that open communication is important at that age too.
Well, and I guess the final thing in my notes, and I'll give you the last word. I go back. I had rewritten here in my notes in terms of, again, if we all are trying to be right, we're going to have a problem, right?
Right.
We're trying to work together to get it right,
Yes.
and if we can have that common goal, I'm the first to understand that there's different dynamics there. There's different facilities available. There's different resources available. I mean, it's one of those things where I've always said, let's marry the old and the new. There's part of me that says just because we used to do it different doesn't mean we did it wrong. But
Right.
I also understand that there's better ways to to do it. I joke sometimes, we used to go outside to use the bathroom, and then we thought this indoor plumbing thing was kind of cool, right? It's one
It's
of
like
those.
it's like my Uncle Larry always said, the good old days weren't good. I mean, they weren't all good. There's a few
Right,
things that were good, but I like these power tools. I like the
right,
microwave, I
right.
like some of these things, right?
And that's my point, is we have to work together. It's a two-way street. There has to be a respect both ways. And I don't know if coaches we played for, Matt, I don't know if their relationship with a 5th grade, 6th grade parent, 7th grade parent was quite as important then, but I'm telling you it is now, because
Right.
again, we live in a different environment of choices and acceleration and so forth. So that's just where I am. Final thought for you. I'll give some contact information. We'll get out of here this week.
No, I think that what I just said was sort of my final thought with the communication, and just the open,
Okay.
honest communications is so important. And this is a dynamic topic, because when you're talking about parent and coaches, this there's been, let's face it, there's been friction at times there since the beginning of time, right? And there probably will be for years to come. But I think that understanding that, hey, look, these two parties are never going to see perfectly eye to eye on every single thing. That's important to understand. That is the first step to making peace. Sometimes just understanding that we're not going to agree on everything. But what can we do? Hey, we can have the open, honest communication. We can do some of these things we've talked about tonight, and hopefully make the best out of it.
Great show. It was fun as always. It's hard to believe that we're on show. What did we say tonight? 9.
9. Yeah.
Moving along. It's been a great experience here on Expanding the Zone, and tonight's a great example of about how 25 different pieces of advice from or feedback from last week kind of led us to tonight. This was a show that was kind of on our early radar, Matt, and then as the feedback came in, it just made a lot of sense. And looking ahead a little bit, I know we have one coming up here on officials and umpires and some different dynamics there. We're kind of putting the final touches on. Down the road, we'll look at the state of the game for football. We'll look at the state of the game for basketball. We have a huge show. We might even have to make it a two-part series. I know there's a lot of people been asking me every week, hey, can't wait for that one. So your feedback is very, very important because, yes, we have ideas of some shows we want to do, but we want to make it relevant. Obviously, more and more sports are starting back up here, and we want to be relevant to what's going on there as well. So let me throw some feedback opportunities out to you. Email is admin1@svcsportzone.com. You can find us on all social media. Just go to svcsportzone.com. We're on Instagram. We're on Facebook. We're on Twitter. Check us out on YouTube, SVC Sports Zone. Gives you an opportunity to see us on the screen. A little bit more conversational. Every now and then we use the screen to give you some resources and some other things. And then, of course, on your podcast apps. Well, I know we're on iHeart. We're on Spotify. We're on Apple. And I'm sure there's some out there I'm missing. But you can get us every time there. Subscribe to us, give us a nice rating. Appreciate all of that. So Matt, appreciate the effort this week again. It's fun. We got 9 in the book. Looking forward to some really cool topics we have coming up. And until then, we'll just say thanks for listening, thanks for watching, and we'll see you soon here on Expanding the Zone.